Trying to get you to buy the printer and commit to a subscription plan for your ink cartridges.
Well, I thought the thing to do now is
But our microphone hopefully is.
All right, well, let's bring this, thank you. Let's bring this meeting to order. Today is Thursday, March 6th, 2025. And this is the meeting of the City of Harbor Springs, Michigan Planning Commission. It's 5:31 local time. So let's get going. We have a roll call, Jeff.
Bill Mulder,
Here.
Barry Lutzgard. Here. Michael Behrman. Here. Bob Buckner. Here. Vanessa Warren.
Here.
Kenny Stewart. Here. Tony Johnson.
Here.
Chip Everest. Here. Mark Day is absent and Annika Lonzi.
Here.
We have a quorum.
And we do not have minutes from the last meeting because this is, I guess, kind of a special meeting still. And then next thing on the agenda is public comment and correspondence for items that are not on tonight's agenda. And the only things on tonight's agenda are zoning, review of red lines of Articles 13 and 8, view of Article 6. So Mark Rondell has a comment.
As briefly as I can, because I know I went over. I just want to say briefly what I said to a meeting of the West Traverse Zoning Board a couple weeks ago. As just a general understanding, so that maybe it helps people understand where I'm coming from. If I were to reduce all of my interests in planning and zoning to one concept or one phrase, that is to minimize or eliminate sprawling growth. And this is a magazine that came out about 25 years ago by something called Michigan Land Use Institute. They were trying to put a framework around the sprawling growth that occurred in the Traverse City area. And I don't know how that all turned out, but these people are defunct now, John says. But anyway, I'll leave this with Jeff. If anybody wants to look at some of the articles and stuff about sprawling growth. And this here is a little demonstration that I've tried to do for years and years, but I never had the right stuff until a couple days ago. I went to the resale store out here, New Beginnings, and they were giving away all kinds of free stuff to clear out for their new renovation. And they had big bags of poker chips, which are exactly what I needed. And so here it is. It's kind of hard to see because it has to be flat and horizontal. But anyway, this is Emmett County. And these stacks of poker chips represent concentrated growth. Each chip is more or less the footprint of either one household or 10 households or 100 households, depending on what the scale of the map is or and how many chips you have. And this would represent a scenario of more or less concentrated growth throughout Emmett County. You can note that there's impacts in certain areas that create point source pollution that can be controlled. There's plenty of open space in Emmett County. There's forest land and so on. People can access it. And then this represents sprawling growth. And you can see right away the difference that we have between concentrated growth and sprawling growth. And so if we want to minimize environmental impacts, particularly, we want to minimize infrastructure, if we want to minimize whatever impacts our population is doing on a region, that's the way to go about it. Thank you all for your patience.
For the folks on Zoom, if I can explain what you said. Mark Rondell has a map of Emmett County, and we have poker chips of different colors representing different households of people, and they were all pretty much stacked up around 5 feet and And then his illustration, he was planting, he spread those out across the county to illustrate what sprawling growth would look like. Great. Any other comments? Jeff?
Thank you. That actually might be a perfect lead into my short little speech.
Now that the city of Harbor Springs is no longer part of the
Can
RFC,
you introduce yourself?
I'm sorry, Jeff James. Now that the city of Harbor Springs is no longer part of the RFC, common sense said it would make the zoning update process much easier, smoother, and be focused on what's good for Harbor Springs and its citizens. We no longer need to appease Lansing and the state of Michigan. Great news. Now we can concentrate on what's needed and what's not needed. The cookie cutter approach is now out the window. That said, I have two items that I'd like to question, frankly, get an answer to. A few weeks ago, I emailed a member of your committee with two easy questions and was told, I don't know. This was and is very concerning to me. So let's see if someone on the committee can answer this. Two easy questions. Why would we want build by right? Why would we want this committee to take away current taxpayer citizens' landowner rights and give it away? It makes no sense not to be notified of a neighbor's intentions to build or do changes that might affect another's property. Yet this is a potential option. Why is this a good idea? Number two, why would we want smaller lots? The only reason for a smaller lot is more density. We're a town of 1.3 square miles and certainly do not need more density. We were lied to and asked what more density could do to the current infrastructure, and the answer was, we're okay. Fact is, 8 years ago, while I was on the sewer board, we were at capacity in June and July. More density means more stress on the current infrastructure, which means more taxes for a bond issue to supply services to take care of building density that is not needed. Please tell me why this is good or is needed in Harbor Springs. If these two very simple questions cannot be answered, then these two items need to be left alone because it works well as is. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jeff. Anyone else in the room have a comment or yes, Linda?
Linda Rodwitz, 519 East Third Street. And I just want to tell you all how impressed I am that you're hanging in and doing this. You know, 6 of you already been through this and done it again. And I am truly impressed with your dedication to the service to the community. And for the 3 newbies, you knew what you were getting into and you still raised your hand and got into it. Annika, you might not have known what you're into, but anyway, thank you very much for your service. I think we're on the right track to get a zoning code that most people will be thrilled. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other comments in the room? I'm looking on Zoom. I do not see any hands up. If you're on Zoom and you'd like to make a comment at this point, you need to raise your Zoom hand. It's under react or reactions at the bottom of your screen. Okay, none there. And Jeff, let me think for a couple minutes about the best way to answer your questions. And let's answer those before the end of the meeting. Yeah, like, or do you need to duck out? Yeah, you need, okay.
Well, if I can email me, we had a very in-depth discussion at the February 20th Planning Commission meeting, talking about by right uses, permitted uses versus special land uses. So I would encourage you to watch that meeting to look at the difference between them and what they mean and how they're used.
I'm sorry, what was the date of the meeting?
February 20th.
Yeah, in the first half hour, 20 minutes recorded. Great. And what was the second? Oh, density. So I'm gonna suggest to the Planning Commission that we have another learning segment at our next meeting on density. So that's, I think, the best way we can address it. And we'll all learn together what the state of the art is, what the thinking is, what the issues are. And yeah, come on, next meeting 2 weeks from tonight. We're gonna do that. If Planning Commission is in favor of that. Learning segment on density, people are nodding their heads. Okay, great.
Excuse me, will it be on the agenda when you post the agenda?
Yes, it will.
That's great. Thank you all so much.
I do think it's worth mentioning that we have not made any decisions on either of those items.
Right.
Good, okay.
Bill, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but just a quick reminder, we won't be having a meeting at the beginning of April. Our next meeting will be April 17th.
So we mean.
Our next meeting is 2 weeks from tonight.
There's another March.
There's another. March.
Well, another March meeting.
Yeah.
You're right. Thank you. Sorry about that. I got confused.
No, fair.
Which is easy.
Yeah.
Just a comment, just picking up on Jeff's points, he talked about density, but also specifically about smaller lots. So in our help session or training session, perhaps we could have a reminder about where the lots are in 2005 current code and where some of the proposals were last year, just as a comparison.
You bet.
I also think it's important that we have folks here from the city that can actually speak about water, sewer, and the utilities. And the stress that they, or else we're just once again throwing things out. It'd be great to have someone here from engineering or DPW.
It would also be good if we could figure out how many lots are available to make double lots and things like that, so we know what kind of numbers we're looking at, because I think it's a smaller problem than other people think.
Okay, so two things I just heard there were info on infrastructure and maybe some stats on existing lots and their sizes and potential mathematical
Right.
split.
That's not part of an
Possibility.
association or has the ability to increase their lots.
Great. All right, thanks for that. Jeff, could you scroll down to the calendar? I think it's towards the end of the package. Let's just take stock of where we're at. Okay, go up one, that's fair. Yep, here's our latest view. And tonight we are at March 6th. We're going to be reviewing the red lines of the articles we looked at last meeting. Those are numbers 8 and 13, and then we're going to go into Article 6, brand new tonight. We have our meeting 2 weeks from tonight, March 20th. We're going to look at the red lines of the article that we do tonight. And then we'll also pick up supplemental regulations and special land use approvals. And then we have one meeting on the books for April. And that's in the third week, whatever that date is. And then we could get into perhaps, I think if John says that's the right thing, land development options. And then we'd be ready to go in May with Articles 2, 3, 4, and 5. Does that sound good to everybody?
Yes.
All right. Well, good. And then could you scroll down one more, Jeff? And John put together a kind of a tracking sheet for all the articles that we've worked on. John, you want to tell us how to read this?
Yeah, I kind of did it primarily for my benefit, so I'm not confused on what we're doing. But on the left-hand column is all of the articles listed 1 through 14. And then at the top, the columns at the top are the dates that the Planning Commission is either was presented the initial article, and then highlighted in green is the second time that the Planning Commission looked at the article, and that could be when we're reviewing the red lines. And that's how we'll track them. And then at some point in time, when the Planning Commission signs off on the red line, then I'll put down that article for now is kind of tagged as being done. So we can track which ones we still have to work on until we have a full document.
Okay.
Where's that document? Is that in the packet today? In the packet today.
At the end.
Yes, here.
Hi, Karen Outfield, Bridgewood. The only thing I was looking at with this is that when we get further along and start to redline other pieces, John, are we gonna need to go back to some of these earlier articles and review them as to see how they are are setting up everything, and so might there be a third draft?
There could be, because there's some articles that require cross-referencing to other articles that we'll have to go back and make sure we have the right citation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, planning commission, you all ready to take a look at those red lines?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yep, can you scroll a little bit? Let's start with Article 8. I don't see any red yet.
We didn't have a lot in Article 8.
Between two on the first page, just very simple editorial.
Oh, yeah. Grammar.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, I see an S. We don't have any until we get down to site plan application requirements, where we modified some wording here.
Bill, can I
Yeah.
comment on that?
Yeah.
Okay, so,
Jump in, everybody.
John, on line, item number 6. The wording should probably read,
Within 50 feet.
yes.
It's got to.
I don't want to get monopolized. Line 156. This is a really nit, but after 30 foot or 30 inches by 42 inches, there should be an inches sign after. And that's all I had on the article.
I do have a quick question for John. John, it says shall submit 2 sets. Is there a reason that I would want to have 2 sets of 2 copies of a plan as opposed to 1?
Yeah, because the way this is set up is once the planning commission approves the site plan, the 2 sets are signed by the chairman and by the applicant. 1 set stays with the city, 1 set goes home.
That's all I did.
Anybody else notice anything on 8?
Yeah, was there a addition to the table in 8.4 for coastal resiliency?
It's on number 19.
Also was an, yes, okay, got it, thank you. Yep, okay.
All right, anybody got anything else on 8? All right, Jeff, can we flip to 13? John? Yeah.
I think on 8.2 C, because those are different zoning codes than the ones that are in the current zoning code. We were gonna put those in red or just wait until we had worked on that.
Oh,
8.2, number C,
Jeff, can you scroll down?
line 22.
22. Right.
Yeah, we had talked about that at the meeting, last meeting. We said we'd go back and put the new codes in.
Well, let's make them in red.
We can, not a problem.
We can afford it, right? You got any? Great. All right, last call on 8. Moving on to, what is it, 16?
I show one other very small editorial in 8.83. It's in the last line of 8.83, planning commission cannot be resubmitted. Okay, it's there. Okay.
There, yeah.
Got it.
Well, 13.
Okay, 13.
Well, if nobody else has anything, John, don't throw things at me.
I won't,
Okay. Where you insert from the beginning in parentheses,
can you give me the line number?
I'm sorry, 294. I can't believe you missed this. You need to add a space after that. Yes. Oh, that's all I have.
Anybody else have anything? Okay. Great. Well, let's consider those closed for the time being. And we can move on to Article 6, Site Development Standards. John, you want to tell us about the purpose of this section and what we need to think about?
Yeah, the purpose of the site development standards is we grouped anything in the, I'll use the term current ordinance. I don't want to confuse it, the current ordinance that we're operating. Anything that was in the current ordinance that dealt with anything that related to how people have to design their site, like landscaping, parking, storm drainage, all that good stuff. We pulled it all together into one chapter. So all of the site development standards are together and they're not sprinkled throughout the ordinance. So this includes, like I said, parking, landscaping, green belts, screening, non-motorized bicycle parking, parking, loading zones, all the good stuff that goes with that we have to incorporate into a site plan.
And does this apply to every property in the city?
In some cases, it may, depending on what uses, like for example, in the screening, if somebody is putting in a commercial property that's adjacent to a residential, they may have to provide a buffer, a landscape buffer, like currently do in the ordinance. But primarily it's things that we look at when we evaluate special use permits and site plans.
Yeah. So a site plan could be a residential development of 5+ units or something like that. It could be a business use, it could be a change of use.
That's right.
But it's not just somebody building fence.
No, they would get a zoning permit from Jeff.
Yeah. So Jeff is not going to require bicycle parking for your fence and.
No.
Okay.
No.
If they were building a home, we might come to this because there are some things here for single family homes and whatnot.
But building a deck or a fence, they would get a zoning permit from Jeff.
Okay. Good. Any commissioners, any intro questions or you just get to it?
I'm good.
Great. Well, maybe I do have a macro question. John, why do we need any parking standards at all?
That's pretty radical. Some communities have gotten rid of parking altogether. They just leave it up to the private sector in terms of how many parking spaces they want. I mean, God bless his soul. He just passed away about 3 weeks ago. Donald Shoup, professor at Stanford, has been an advocate for 30 years to get rid of parking standards because they're land use consumptive. And they don't really generate any taxes. And they cause congestion. So, I mean, if you guys want to go the route of getting rid of parking altogether, I would applaud you.
I don't know. I don't know. I can't figure out if it's beneficial or not beneficial to the city and to residents.
Well, you know, you have to think about it at the community level. Your downtown's pretty much built out. You really don't have any other, you don't have any other land to build unless you build municipal parking facilities like that. You don't want to do that because the municipal parking's along the bay, along the lake, and you'll block views. So these parking standards are really set up primarily for commercial businesses and for institutions, and you already have those in place. I mean, Bill, I think your macro question is really good in terms of thinking. What is there to gain or lose from it if you get rid of parking standards? I mean, think about it. The community's already pretty much built out.
Just a comment. I agree with the conversation, but we have to make sure that we're future proofing this too. And I don't know what's gonna happen in 30 years. I would like fewer regulations, and the idea of no parking code is, in a macro sense, a good idea. But I had one note to myself related to one of the specific passages, which we may or may not get to. And that is, what if someone says, I will build parking for my business, because I think that's in everyone's best interest. And then I'm going to build it in a way that might not be to the character of the town. I'll give you an example. What if someone said, I'm gonna build some parking spaces, and to minimize the footprint of the land, I'm gonna build ramps and these mechanical lifts so that I can put cars above cars, and it'll be great. All my employees have the space above, and we'll have retail space parking underneath. Me personally, I don't want to look at lifts and hydraulics and all that stuff. If we have nothing addressing parking at all, there might be some consequences to that. And so if we wanted to perhaps regulate it, if it is done, but leave it up to the owner operator or whomever to decide how many spaces, that might protect ourselves from the future. Just a thought.
Anybody else have any thoughts? I
need to think about it for sure, but what would the merchants want?
Okay.
I think they want more parking, right, so that their customers have more convenience. Am I thinking the right way? I would think that that's what they would want. Not less parking. And like, I guess the downtown area is already built out, like Kenny was saying. I wouldn't want to do anything that merchants wouldn't want to do. And I just got to put myself in their shoes right now. I don't know.
Chip, I take your point, but the issue is that, as I see it, is it's a finite resource, right? I mean, you can't make more parking in downtown. I think that's John's.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's interesting you should bring this up, Bill, because I hadn't considered it, and I agree with you, Chip. It's something that I think we all need to think a little bit about and understand what the consequences are. You raised a really good point about what is it that we don't know about what's going to happen at some point in the future. So, but it definitely is something that I think is worthy of quite a bit more thought. But at the end of the day, if we decide we're going to require businesses to have X number of parking spaces, the question that they're going to ask is, that's great, where am I going to do that?
But the tone of this is a maximum number of spaces, not a minimum. So, they can have fewer parking spaces if they wanted to for the agreement.
Yeah, I get that, but
Maybe that's another kind of thing to think about.
yeah, no, most retailers, I'm guessing most retailers downtown are not saying I want fewer parking spaces.
Right.
They're probably saying I want more parking spaces so that, to your point, so that it's more convenient for my customers to park proximate to my establishment.
Well, these are private parking spaces. These are not public parking spaces, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so somebody wants to develop a new business, wherever that may be. This says how many parking spaces, the maximum number of parking spaces that they could build on their property. And that's something we want to specify, or should we let the business owner decide what the right mix is for her or his business?
But we do have public in.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We do have public in here, and I'm not too sure that some of our biggest parking lots are not. And the schools have land and the schools can keep developing those parking lots. So.
Do you wanna table this and think about it for a couple of weeks?
So just apply to bicycle parking and non-motorized parking and all the other stuff in here? Maybe.
Whatever we think's best. Yeah, Karen, help us think this through.
Should I go up there?
Whatever,
Yeah.
yeah, I think people can hear you better.
Fair enough, in virtue. At the DDA meetings and the RRC meetings, we had discussions about things like this. And what the merchants want was their employees to have perhaps maybe some designated parking. And we don't really know how many employees have cars and where they park, but we do know they park in front of the stores and there's no place that they're supposed to be parking or going up the hills. And so one suggestion was to sticker the employee cars to just see how many there are. And sort of review what happens during the summer with something like that. And then just as an off topic, for sports events all over Europe, what they do, they, for 4th of July and everything, people rent out their lawns for people to park on. And so it's a way to get a little added in.
Mark, run it.
Yeah.
Mark Rendell, 181 Zoll Street. I was on the first DDA in Harbor Springs here. And our sole mission was to create the parking lots that we have downtown now behind the New York, near the Methodist Church. Seems like there was another one up off 3rd Street, by the bluff and so on. So that's what we spent, that was done 2 or 3 years. That's what we spent our time doing. And that is perhaps my biggest regret that I ever did in my life. Was when you build parking lots, you ask for cars. If you build it, they will come. And this is one of the foundational things that I've worked from for the last 25 years too, is that if we encourage automobile traffic, we're going to get it. Kenny, I understand that we don't know for sure what's going to happen in 30 years, but if we extrapolate from what's happened over the past 30 years, we're going to be totally inundated with cars here in 30 years. So we need to start thinking now about how we are going to control this. And this concept of eliminating parking requirements for sure, minimums, but just beyond that, even discouraging. And so I'd like to read just very quickly, section 6.1. I decided that I had so many conflicts with the whole of Article 6 that I would just rewrite the intent and purpose of the 6.1. And my proposal to rewrite that intent and purpose, because I feel a lot of it is ambiguous, is not defined. What is the general welfare? What is, I forget the terminology, but it's right there in the intent. So my rewrite would state, the purpose of the regulations contained in this article is to protect public health and safety, period. To promote needed and critical development, to remove unnecessary expense and complications for future development, to discourage automobile use by not requiring parking minimums, and to promote non-motorized and mass transit options. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. What would you think about reviewing this again, in 2 weeks, the whole idea of having parking or no parking requirements. Maybe we can do some individual research, read some articles, try to figure out what the advantages and disadvantages would be. And, yeah, Sonic.
I don't know this, but is there a reason why we don't have parking meters in Harbor? Unless it's in town? Sorry.
No, great question.
No, I know Pulaski has.
They sure do. Yep, that was an issue that was thoroughly discussed by the community over a couple of years, and turned out to be one of the very hottest of hot button issues that there could be. So, and the decision was made to go a different way.
I think there's some value to having a maximum number of parking spaces. You know, I mean, part of it says, let's just let the free market decide, but we don't want it to be just a big parking lot either, so, I don't know.
Yeah, this is Tony. I agree, Chip. I feel that, well, I put quite a bit of effort reading this section. There is references to minimum/maximum, which I think we need to look at, but I think a maximum is probably a good idea, because we don't want over parking. We don't want, you know, your classic Kmart where you've got endless asphalt that never gets used, doesn't allow drainage, and it's just an eyesore. And I think if we don't have anything, then there could be opportunities for people to go over. But while it does say here, there is no minimum parking requirements. I think maybe an expansion on that to say that, you know, while there are no minimum parking requirements, consideration should be given to not having parking in your development to make that a little stronger. But I think without a maximum, we're potentially opening ourselves up to concern. I would like to see this tabled because I think I'd like to hear some more public input on this. And if we're going to have it, this section 6.2.2 open for discussion next week, we should clearly put that on the agenda too, so people are aware of that. So just to summarize, I think we should have a maximum, but I would like to hear more input from the public.
Okay.
I think also there's a reason for minimum numbers too, and that's so that parking doesn't overflow onto streets. And such as well, especially when you look at some of the residential uses. You know, we haven't gone that far yet to determine what types of residential dwellings we're gonna have and what zoning areas and so forth. But if you have, one of the concerns is if you have, let's say you had a family residence in a residential area, you want to ensure that there is some minimum set parking there so that parking doesn't overflow onto the street, obstructing traffic. Certainly if we ever got into home occupations, you know, you want to have some type of standards. We don't want to certainly jam up our residential areas with cars parked in the streets. Well, there's, you know, when we talk about it, some level of mix of residential and business together. You do have to have, I think, some types of standards for the common good.
I have a comment. As we're discussing this, question came to mind, and I don't know how to answer it, but what is the parking that we want to specify it to whatever level we specify? What is the parking situation that we're trying to address? By that, I mean, in late March, there's too much parking. 4th of July, there's not enough. Should the parking service the maximum number of people, such as 4th of July? Should it simply address the needs of the businesses and the retail business, thinking about the downtown area? You know, how do we define the parking, what it's trying to deliver? And I don't honestly know that, because we're getting cars, to Michael's point, we're getting cars parked up the hill on 4th of July, which doesn't look all that healthy. Yet we've got too much parking on the off season. So Is it simply to address the retail needs at a certain time of year or what? That would help me frame in my mind how we might want to make some specifications. And I'm open, I don't have the answer.
And I got something real quick also. Maybe this is something that we should table till after we get everything pushed through, because this may hold things up. Just being another thing that we're throwing in, really without getting the public's input and kind of really taking our time with it. So, I mean, this currently, what's in there now really won't have much of an impact, what's already happened, so.
Because this is for new developments.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's something that we want to table and kind of just focus on getting what we need to kind of get through this. So.
I agree. This is, I think we're talking for new development. I think, you know, we have situation, the 4th of July, you know, other big events in the city that, yeah, parking is a nightmare. That's probably not on planning commission. That's not really in our purview. Karen raised, you know, a suggestion, great idea. Again, that's probably not so much planning commission, but maybe some other solution, shuttling folks in, you know, running shuttles and, you know, during 4th of July from, you know, above the bluff or something like that, or, but that's not, I don't think that that's necessarily within our purview. I think we're talking about new site plans and land uses that come to us, how, you know, if somebody wanted to open up a childcare in a zone that was, you know, that we deemed after doing 2 and 3, we deemed as acceptable. What is there a minimum parking and a maximum parking standard so that it doesn't impact the other businesses or residences around? So
If I could chime in with a couple of comments here on parking. This is a section that I think is significantly different from our existing zoning code. And I think it's good that it is, because our old zoning code had a lot of issues that in certain districts created problems, primarily within the central business district is a great example. There were significant parking minimums, especially when converting property from one use to another. Historically, over the 10 years that I've been here, we have reduced the parking requirements on property owners, specifically businesses in the CBD, because it was driving away new commerce coming to the community that we would have liked to have seen. You know, we had a lot of property owners that needed to try and meet the minimum requirements, so they were leasing parking spaces from other people. Those available parking spaces for lease became, you know, non-existent because they were all leased away. So it just stopped business owners from even coming into town. So removing the minimums, I think, is great, particularly in the CBD. However, an area that I don't think we should remove minimums from are some of the residential uses in residential neighborhoods, because that is an area where when people start parking on streets, we do get calls about that, and that's something that they wouldn't like. So as you're contemplating this for when we table it and bring it back up for discussion, I would think not just about how it might be in the downtown area, but also in other neighborhoods and how it might be utilized there. Also then for changes in use, like Michael Merriman mentioned, if a downtown business is switching from one use to another, how it might affect them or a use in other neighborhoods.
Okay. Yes, sir. Officer.
Evening, Sergeant Bishop, Harbor Springs Police Department. Kind of following up with what Jeff is explaining in terms of parking. A lot of complaints we dealt with in terms of the short-term rentals. A lot of times the owners are not explaining to them about the parking situations, especially when it comes to enforcement, snow removal. You know, in the summertime, we enforce the hours that they can park on the street. So I think one thing the commission could take into effect, because we deal with it a lot, anytime we write a citation, we're getting phone calls, people complaining, oh, you never explained this. Especially when it comes to the private dwellings that are being used as short-term rentals, having a minimum for those rentals, especially. Because, you know, obviously, they're renting it for a weekend, but a lot of the time it's, hey, we have 5 different families showing up renting this place, and we're taking up 6 public parking parking spots. And, oh, I was never told I can only park here for 3-4 hours, and then it becomes quite a headache for the police department. So just one thing for everyone here to consider. Thank you.
Thanks. Good question.
Yeah, sure.
What sort of a burden now is dealing with these on-street parking problems for
I would say it's almost a daily occurrence where we get a phone call about parking, whether it's in the wintertime snow removal. Obviously, this winter, a lot of people, we had a great ski season. So we had quite a few phone calls of people calling and complaining that we wrote an overnight no parking ticket for snow removal. So I would say, especially in the wintertime, it's a daily occurrence. In the summer, it's multiple times every single day about parking. We deal with a lot of parking.
So it's primarily an education problem.
Correct. Educating the individuals visiting our area that are not familiar with the code.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
As an addendum to that, we have an unlicensed short-term rental across the street from us, it's John Wayne, 43 East 3rd Street. And the resolution to the parking problem on the street was plowing the lawn to provide for 2 extra parking spots. So I really think that this is going to be, because the demand is in excess of the supply, I really think you've got to do something to get a handle on it so the city can enforce it.
All right, well, I just heard a couple things that are probably more in the purview of the city code and city council. And this article is about new development, heavily about business. Jeff did bring up the point, though, that let's not forget about the residential side of things, so that that makes sense. Chip's point is that maybe we do need a maximum.
Agree with
Maybe a
that.
minimum too. All right, so you wanna do a little research over the next couple of weeks and touch base on this again at the next meeting? We still don't even need to decide something for sure at that point, but yeah, why don't we sleep on it and put that at the beginning of our agenda? All right. So then, John, where would that take us next?
I think it would take you to line 177, access management.
Right.
Actually, that's part of the parking as well,
Right.
so
Yeah.
probably down to bicycle parking,
Okay.
210.
You say what? Here, I mean, like 6.3.
6.3.
6.3. Nice, okay.
So the question is, do we want to require bicycle parking with the new, with the new development?
If I could just chime in
Yeah,
here.
please do.
I don't know whether we need to require it, but have it as an option and certainly some regulations regarding it. Bicycles downtown is becoming a huge thing. There were a couple days where I walked around downtown because we had some issues or whatnot, or just wanting to catch up on things before they became issues. And just the sheer numbers of bicycles parked everywhere you can possibly cram one. And if we can encourage, and I think part of this was to provide, and correct me if I'm wrong, Don, but I think we had some stuff in here where basically we could entice people to say, do some bicycle parking instead of vehicle parking.
Correct.
Because we need so much of it. Just, the green space by the parking lot behind Gurney's, but by the road there. Dozens and dozens of bicycles laying on the ground, or just in the green space in front of Johann's, dozens and dozens of bicycles. All over the place. So having some places where these bicycles could be stored, that's more helpful to the public, I think would be a great benefit. And if we can provide some language of how that could be done in a helpful manner, I think would be very
Well, but that would just be for new development we're talking, right? Not existing bicycle problems downtown.
or even just ways that existing businesses could capitalize on this and do something that they feel might work for their business or help their neighborhood, you know?
But in this context,
It's not our purview for the stuff that's happened, that's already there.
correct.
That's the city council, right?
That's what I'm thinking. It's an ordinance. Yeah. All right, well, not being an expert on bicycle parking, but this language looked good and looked thorough and it looked flexible. I didn't have any improvements to suggest there. Anybody else have any thoughts on that one?
I have some comments on this
Okay.
section. And this would, Jim, to your point, this would be about future development, not about difficulties today. And I'm getting smarter with the line numbers. Section 6.3, item C, which is line 220. This is a small nit here. We have a lot of shall require certain things, which I agree with, but one of them was provide lockable and enclosed lockers. And I suggest we change the word shall to the word may, so it's much more of an option to develop. That's on, again, line 220.
It's the word or that is, the word or is there though, so I interpret it to be, shall provide one of those racks.
Or
Yeah.
equivalent structures.
Yeah, so you can do
Equivalent
a
structures.
locker, you can do a
Like, could
rack.
be enclosed lockers, or it could be a
Enclosed.
rack, or it could be. Cause that word or was there,
Okay, well, that would solve my problem. I didn't
maybe
wanna-
one of the at least one of the following, or, you know.
That, if that's the way to interpret it, then.
That's how I
didn't
did,
wanna
because
force
I
it.
kind of first got hung up on that too, like, you gotta be kidding, lot. Enclosable lockers, then I kind of. Read it. Through as well.
Sentence doesn't flow, it means you're gonna do one of these.
Okay, well, let's strike that, but I've got another one that's even better. Line 225. At the end of that paragraph, we're also asking that these areas on the surfaces for the bike racks be mud and dust free. And I think saying dust free is a little bit of a high bar.
Yeah.
So I suggest we strike that.
I was almost gonna replace, sorry to interrupt, I apologize, but cause I got hung up on that too. And did they mean rust free? Not dust free, like I thought, seriously, I thought it was like a.
Surfacing, so it would be.
I think this is regarding the surfacing. I think we're trying to avoid situations where there's loose material like gravel. Where with all the pedestrian traffic to the bicycles being moved around, that gravel would then be displaced into our streets. Which causes issues for the DPW and street cleanup and our sewer system.
We could say loose aggregate or something like that, wanted to protect against it. I'm not worried about dust.
Okay, anything else on bicycle parking at the moment?
It was brought up like bicycle parking, could you put like bike racks like in one of the parks? To keep like.
DDA or city council could do that. Yeah, shoot them a note on that. Seriously.
I have one more.
Yeah.
A little further down. Section 6.3 F, as in Frank, line 239, mostly a question. I wasn't sure how to interpret this. This is the section about I have the ability to reduce the parking spaces of cars if I can put in some bike racks. But is, a question for you, John, is a rack holding, as an example, rack holding 10 bicycles, does that count as 10, 10 slots? Or does that count as two? Depending on this math, this is line 239. This section.
Yeah.
So like for each 5 bicycle parking spaces, the automobile parking can be reduced by 1 parking space. So each slot is a bicycle. Okay, so if I have 5 slots, I can get rid of a car.
Correct.
Okay.
But isn't that redundant with saying there's no minimum parking requirements? If we're saying you can reduce your minimum parking requirements by putting in a bike rack. But if we don't have minimum parking requirements,
We have minimum, maximum parking requirements.
right? But the way parking's currently written is there is no minimum.
Yeah, yes, yeah.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah, there is. The way that the way that the schedule was written on 6.2.2, it says minimum / maximum parking.
Right. But
So what we did, just because you're gonna think about this. Ordinances had a minimum, okay? So for example, for somebody like Myers, because I ran into this with them quite a bit. Myers Grocery Store, the minimum that they had to meet was 4 per 1,000 square feet. However, they were building for 8 spaces per 1,000 square feet. And that's why your Lowe's, your Home Depot and your Myers, Kmart's always had more parking. They met the minimum, but they exceeded it by maybe 2.5 times. So the current provisions are you have a minimum and a maximum, and that's it. You can only go up to that level. Now, some codes have a minimum, then they also have a maximum. But we didn't even want to give, because parking is so limited here. You have such limited space for it. We wanted to make sure that it was minimum and maximum, so they have to meet that number and that number only. Unless the planning commission wants to do minimum and allow like a percentage above the minimum as a cap. But if you just do minimums, chances are somebody's gonna say, well, I need to build 4, but I want to build 8. And that's where you end up with the overage.
I guess I'm confused now. I thought section 6.2.2 on parking requirements was maximum of.
No, top at the table.
Well, I know the table says that. It's one of my
Minimum and maximum.
one of my points, but it only talks about it's only one number.
That's it.
Same.
Same. It's the same number.
one.
Oh,
If you have to build.
this
2,
exact
you
number.
can't build
Yeah, it's the
anymore.
exact.
Sorry,
It's
thank you.
confusing.
I didn't understand the way that table was written. Okay. Strike my comment thing, because now I understand.
Oh, that's fine.
Could there be a sentence, the header of this to say that minimum and maximum are the same thing?
That's letter D. It says minimum, maximum parking requirements. We could say the minimum number of parking, off-street parking is also the maximum.
Sorry to be so literal. but
Yeah.
we can do that.
I think it might be good to have a line there with D that says, if there's only one number, then that shall be the minimum and maximum. Just for clarification, so it can't be misunderstood.
Did you,
I misunderstood it.
so John, last time I asked, what the tenor of this was vis-a-vis the existing code. You're saying that it's more restrictive is what we're proposing now?
Yeah, the existing code is just a minimum,
Right,
so
okay.
you can build over it if you want.
Thanks.
I would also add that in some cases that minimum is quite high. An example, when the Island Bean ceased to be before Johans came in. There was a property owner that was looking at renting it or purchasing it for the purpose of putting in a restaurant. And the conversion to a restaurant would have required that they add 12 additional parking spaces. Where would they find 12 more parking spaces? We've since made some modifications to the old zoning code to help address that, but it isn't completely gone away. So we can see that the requirements in the current code are, I believe, substantially reduced from that number.
Sorry to keep harping on this, but there's this whole section that is very confusing to me still. So we've just established that section point D on line 137 established that these were minimum and maximums. But if we go to line 94, 622A, it clearly says in here, this ordinance establishes a maximum number of parking spaces. There is no minimum parking requirement. So that's where all of my confusion came from, was that first statement. So I will reiterate my first comment.
Yeah, well, I guess with that in place then, those are maximums and there is no minimum.
No.
Unless you wanna change that.
Yeah, we need to figure that out.
Right, yeah, let's think about that over the next couple of weeks. Yeah,
Okay.
what are we really trying to accomplish?
No, no, that's good, thanks.
Yeah, what problem are we trying to solve, and does this do it? Okay, good discussion. Mark,
Just a real quick little footnote. I lived in the Netherlands for about a year. And they know something about bicycle parking. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
good. Okay, I think we're on the non-motorized transportation.
What does that mean?
Now you tell us.
Non-motorized transportation is basically vehicles that don't have a motor. It's your pathways, it's your sidewalks, and it's your multi-use pathways. Trails.
Okay.
C. When required permits must be obtained from Michigan Department of Transportation or Emmett County Road Commission. Why? Why do those have to be the holder of the permits?
Well, you're not gonna do anything on M119 unless you get a state permit. If you're putting something on the roads and non-motorized,
Right, but the city can hold a permit too.
but you're still like on county road or on 119, we're gonna, if you did anything in the road right away, you're gonna have to get a permit from MDOT.
Okay, so you're saying that there's no way that somebody would need to get a permit from the city?
I don't know if the city issues right away.
Does the city
I don't think
issue?
If somebody's gonna build a sidewalk on
Yeah, if somebody's gonna build a sidewalk, they don't.
Snyder Street or.
They don't have to
That's
go
part
to
of, that's part of public facilities.
the city?
So if somebody's doing a sidewalk in front of their home, we still review that because we wanna make sure that it meets our standard for sidewalks or curb cuts, you know, various things like that. But certainly if it's on a county road or a state road, like West Bluff or state, you know, or
Okay.
Maine.
So if I want to build a sidewalk in front of my home and I'm building it in the right of way, who am I getting that permit from? That's the city.
But if you're building a non-motorized facility that happens to cross a right of way, a state right of way, you're gonna have to get a permit from MDOT to have a pedestrian crossing.
Sure, I understand that. I just think that there's times when you need a permit from the city.
Okay. Does the engineering issue a permit or do you just do zone?
It's part of our site plan review for residential stuff.
So, okay, so you
It's-
don't issue,
It's not, let's say,
Easement.
it's not a permit or an application that would come to the planning commission. It's something that would be handled administratively by staff, by either a combination of myself and or Lucas Vanderzee with the Department of Public Works. So there is a review.
We can just insert city in there. I mean, it's not gonna, I mean, we could just say when required,
yeah,
permits must be obtained from the city, MDOT and Emmett County Road.
perfect.
That covers all three of your entities.
So then in E,
Yeah.
is that the example that Jeff is talking about? The planning commission may require an easement on the property?
Happens before, I've done them before. I don't know if they've done them here in the city. But in some communities where you don't have enough right of way to put the sidewalk in the right of way.
Mhm.
Sometimes the planning commission has required an easement on the private property,
To fit it in?
to fit it in. So this gives the city the right under those circumstances to require or request an easement. And it says that it needs to be reviewed by the city attorney and appropriately recorded as an easement.
So I lose an E that it's going on private property.
That's what an easement would be for.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
I think the East Boardwalk is an example of that we have. Where there's an easement for the east end of the boardwalk.
Okay. Landscaping? No? Vanessa?
Yes. In B, we talk about minimize noise, air and visual pollution. Can we make a comment about heat islands?
Sure. About what?
Heat islands.
Yeah.
Vanessa, could I jump in on that same section? We don't define visual pollution, is that a pollution? That's meant to be
Yeah. Could be light pollution.
light pollution. Let me suggest that we
Well,
define,
visual pollution is, Kenny is, maybe Vanessa can help me from an LA point of view. Visual pollution is if somebody's has a business where it requires outdoor storage. You may want that screen to block that image.
okay,
That's what visual pollution.
let me suggest we add that to section 14,
Add
what visual pollution is,
Oh,
if there's no
for the
definition.
definitions.
Because I was thinking light pollution, which it may very well be, but I see your point about somebody puts up a pile of junk or something.
Yeah, and it's very subjective. What I think is visual pollution is probably very different than what you folks think it is.
Then it'll be a may include but not limited to.
Oh, very.
For F, encourage an appropriate mixture of plant materials. Can we also then say encourage an appropriate mixture of plant materials and species?
Sure. And again, just to remind everybody, this applies to new developments that require a site plan. This is not somebody's existing house where they want to put in a hedge.
Correct. For A, on 6.5.3, line 312. Location, spacing, size, fruit type. I think that there should be a name and a cultivar.
What, like a
What's a cultivar?
list of them? Or you think you want to add those two words?
I want to add those two words, name and cultivar. I want to know the name and the cultivar of the plant going in.
Wow.
Does that mean?
Thank you.
I think it's the last thing.
So it's just that, a name of a plant, you know, whether it's a maple or whether it's an elm, and then the cultivar would be the type of elm. Okay, so,
Sugar maple.
right, and then like some elms now are great at being resistant to the elm borer, but some are not.
Right.
And so by having that cultivar, you can better have a sustainable.
I learned. Everybody in favor of cultivar? Okay, good.
Just a question on that, I'm fine with the language. But is it to simply document that for the new development? Or are you planning to seek some sort of line item veto saying you can't put that plant in?
I think that if there is a plant and a plant's cultivar that could do harm and could bring in disease, I think that something should be done.
I agree, who would judge that? If
Well,
I-
we have a tree board
It's in the ordinance.
and it's in the ordinance too.
Okay, so it would automatically flip to that.
Yeah, we have a tree board and we have a list of trees and species, like if somebody's putting in something within the road right of way or along that edge,
Okay.
that we can kind of collate that
Okay,
with.
as long as we've got the mechanism for that review, if that's what you want, then I'm fine.
So can I ask, are you gonna certify these then? Are they gonna have to be stamped, each plant that goes in? Is it gonna need a certificate to prove that it's actually one of these cultivars?
When a builder is building and the landscape material is on site, that landscape material should be checked.
Who would do that?
Well, it would be the contractor. And
There must be some kind of authority that can certify land, go to a horticultural station or something
I
like.
suppose at this point, that would be.
Let me answer that. I don't think you do it here, but in other communities, on projects that have a fairly detailed landscaping plan, after the materials are on site, the city will have, as we put in the ordinance here, they will have somebody that has that background go out and certify or inspect to make sure all the plant materials are correct. And that's how they do it.
We are getting into the weeds.
Well, I mean, that's how they do it. I'm just explaining how other communities do it. They, we had the tree board. Tree board reviewed the landscaping section. And they come up with a list of recommended indigenous species and invasive plants that they update. And that's what we refer to in the ordinance, is that people will have to consult with the city's list of materials. So the tree board and the arborist wanted to direct everybody to that list.
And this has come up in previous situations. We kind of got into this a little bit with the development that was going in. With the 6 new sites that we did for the Claridge family along the shade drain. And we asked for some situations like this, and we basically directed them that they needed to coordinate with the city's arborist. So I think that would probably be the person that we would enlist to verify whatever we had. And we may not feel the need to do this in every situation, but there may be situations where this comes up, and having this be a portion of the code that we can look to and then enlist the aid of the arborist or whatnot to.
I just feel that because we do look at the landscaping plan, that there be enough information for us to intelligently comment on it.
I would refer back to my intent and purpose of Article 6, to remove unnecessary expense and competition.
You probably would have to, sorry, who's gonna pay, and I'm not trying to be difficult, but who's gonna pay the arborist? Like the city pays the arborist, I know that, but will that then be another fee for whoever's building this? So I think you'll have to, if you're gonna put something in place, be very specific.
Hey, Vanessa, you got any other ones?
Yeah, E, identification of existing trees and vegetative cover to be preserved. Are we asking them to tell us how they plan to preserve it during construction?
Typically on the site.
And then in F, mulch. We're gonna allow mulch?
Yeah. So you're gonna say grass, ground cover, and mulch?
Yes, please.
Yeah. I figured you would.
Is it still me?
Yeah. I figured you
Okay,
would.
and line 352, 6.55, parking lot landscaping. Landscape islands shall be curved and shall not be less than 100 square feet in area. What if I want to do a rain garden?
Okay.
So I don't want curbs. And we have islands out there that are not curbed because they're rain gardens.
Somebody drive into those?
Probably.
Yeah.
Do we have rain gardens that aren't where?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Those aren't curved.
those are not
In the-
curbed. And I mean, depending on the size of your rain garden, you can have some curb, but you have to have cuts in your curb to allow the water in. That's the purpose of them. So I'm just afraid if someone reads this who wants to design, they're like, well, that takes rain gardens out, and I want that to be allowed.
I think if we can have some wording in here that we, as the planning commission, get to make the determination of whether they shall or not. Because there may be situations, I think, where the DPW might like them to be. If that's.
Absolutely. I'm just saying some little tidbit that would allow that rain garden. And the DPW can comment on site plan all the time and say, no, not gonna happen.
So John, with language like replacing shall with may if required?
Yeah, I'll figure something. I get the idea, Vanessa.
I know you do.
Can I jump in for a second? The table at the top of that page.
Yep.
Is there a typo on the first line, RN, to RW has a none? Is that intended?
Yeah, yes, none.
So an RN does not have to provide shielding to RW, but an RW has to provide it to an RN. Is that what I'm, if I make that interpretation?
No, yes, correct.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
That's how we look at it. I mean.
They're both
subject-
residential
subject to
districts.
Yep.
So it didn't warrant some kind of special speaking.
But if somebody's in, if we go down to the RW line and they're adjoining an RN line, then they are required. So it's required on one side only, but not the other. So
Yeah.
to me, that second none on the RN line is either misplaced.
Yeah,
or.
okay, I get what you're saying.
Okay,
We probably need another none.
that's fine.
The second one.
Yeah.
Okay, yep.
I used to go to a Catholic elementary school. When you mention nuns, I get a little concerned.
Shaky. All right. That's what else you have there.
Section 6.57, site landscaping, line 392. Such site area landscaping may include a combination of the preservation of existing tree cover. I think it could be vegetation, preservation of existing vegetation, planting new vegetative material. And then I circled landscape plazas because I don't understand what we're trying to get with landscape plazas.
It was, some of the landscaping, some of the larger homes have fairly ornate gardens and landscape plazas in the front or back. But I'll defer to you. You're a landscape architect.
I'm just thinking it could go away.
Replace landscape plazas, just landscaping.
Yes.
That makes sense, John.
Standards for one tree every 30 lineal feet, is it standard, is it normal? In 6.55? Every ornamental tree.
Standard in the sense of, yeah. Our requirements on like the size of the islands and the parking spots and stuff like that, that's
Normal.
depending on your community. You have some pretty progressive communities that might be a little bit different. For the most part, this is a standard we deal with.
Sorry, Chip, were you asking about 655 or 656?
656, sorry.
Okay. I do also have a comment on the 656. Let me first preface that I understand that there is a consideration in here for underneath power lines, which is of course important. Just thinking about some of the areas in the city where there is very small to no setbacks, if we do keep that once we get into chapter or articles 2 and 3, if we do keep those setback to the averaging of the block, there may be not a sufficient setback to plant sizable trees, or that setback may be entirely underneath the power line, depending on the circumstance. So I don't think those two considerations were appropriately considered.
Well, the minimum of one deciduous tree, that reads as one shade tree, so that's a bigger tree. And then one ornamental tree, that's a smaller tree that can go underneath the line.
Right, but if there's a small or a very small setback and there's power lines over that setback, then you wouldn't be able to have it.
I'm saying that there are trees that exist that can't go underneath lines.
That can or cannot? Sorry.
Can.
Okay. All right, and the site plan would show that, so.
Yes.
That's fine, okay.
I want to say thank you to our audience and folks on Zoom. Not wrapping up, but it just occurred to me, you're really watching the sausage be made here, and thanks for sticking with us.
It's a nitty-gritty.
Yeah.
.5.10, line 446. I just read this, was a consultant trying to figure it out, what it means. So plant materials shall be of varieties and species, comma. I don't understand what that means. Is there no comma there, and that the plant materials shall be a variety and shall be a variety of species, free from insects and diseases, hardy, blah, blah? Okay.
Well, if you look at this where a comma separates sections, if you pull out free from insects, diseases, a variety of species hardy indigenous to northern Michigan. So it's saying that that variety of species that are used need to be indigenous to northern Michigan.
But any plant can have insects, so it doesn't matter what the variety and the species is. That's why I thought it was a variety of species. They need to be free from insects, they need to be hardy, and so forth. You just can't have variety and species that will be free from insects and diseases.
So are you saying take out free from insects and diseases?
No, I'm saying that. Yeah,
Replace the end with of.
Yes.
That plant material shall be a variety of species.
Yes.
Okay.
Which I think that's what follows with what the tree board wants when they want to have a variety. And they just don't want to have a bunch of the same plants.
John, you got that one? Variety of species. What else we got?
I gotta jump back just the section above there, 659H. Now you're in my world, concrete. So I think in the first review, I'd asked for the 5,000, but we need to say a minimum compressive strength of 5,000. I don't really care for the heavy duty concrete, but it's fine, but we need to say minimum 5,000.
Okay. Look at the expertise we have on this. That is something.
I'm also struggling to understand B. The last sentence, a limited mixture of hardy species is recommended rather than many different species to produce a more aesthetic, cohesive, and avoid a disorderly appearing arrangement.
So we're missing the first.
I just.
What do you recommend?
Getting rid of it. I don't know. I wouldn't know how to design for that.
I'll have to
I don't know.
I'll talk with the arborist.
And I would probably end up submitting something that
Let me,
was disorderly.
let me get with the arborist.
I just don't know how I would read that.
They had some ownership in this section.
Perfect, thank you, thank you. Okay, now C on the very next page. Berms shall be constructed with slopes not to exceed a 1 to 3 gradient. The design preference for mowing is 1 to 4. Why do we have 1 to 3?
Was what they discussed. So you're thinking should be 1 to 4?
Because a 1 to 3 now, somebody on a riding mower is on their side and they tip over, and we design a 1 to 4.
In that same section, can we put sod/grass so we're not requiring sod rather than just grass?
Where you at, Tony?
Oh, sorry, it was the same section that
457.
I'm just looking at, so in 457.
And what's your suggestion?
Sod/grass.
Oh, okay. I see.
If you want to have a greater slope with a ground cover you're not going to mow, I'm all for it, right? That's slope restoration. I just think if it's grass, it needs to be a 1 on 4.
Side question here, John. Do we have height requirements? If we're gonna require a berm be in place, is there a certain height that is needed for that berm to be?
That's what you normally see. I see 36 or 42 inches.
Yeah, I see 36 the most.
My concern is if we're elongating that gradient, if we have a height we need to hit and we have a wider gradient, that's gonna widen that berm. And I know in some situations, the available land to put that berm in might be a concern.
It's a limitation, but it's still unsafe to mow a 1 on 3.
Could an alternate be provided then, say if you want to go more than 1 on 3?
Yeah, I'm
It's
gonna,
not gonna be grass.
Right,
I'm gonna write it up that berms have, it'd be 1 to 4 if it's grass. 1 to 3 if it's ground cover.
I'm gonna jump in while I've still got it then. Sub point 1, I guess that's 463. I didn't understand that statement, and maybe it's just my Australian translation here. Paving or other site improvements shall not encroach from the existing trees drip line to be preserved.
Correct.
Are we missing a word?
No.
Okay.
So a tree's drip line is its canopy. And that is where most of the roots that do most of the work are. That's the drip line. And so we're saying you can't pave on the drip line. You're gonna destroy the roots and you're not gonna get enough water down for the tree.
I completely understand that. I just don't think that's the way the sentence reads. Shall not encroach from the tree's drip line to be preserved. Maybe we're missing a word.
Maybe just
To preserve the drip line?
Just get rid of to preserve.
Yeah,
Just on the existing
drip line.
period.
Yeah. I think they're talking about to preserve the tree,
Right,
Mhm.
yeah.
but
Isn't this fun?
You have one.
Not on that page.
We take a turn then. Go back to 6.5.8. I just have one comment, line 397. And I agree with what's written there, but we have a lot of terms thrown around various places like planned unit developments. And I just want to make sure that this section includes all the possible ways that a group of houses could be called.
I believe, and I could be mistaken, but I'm fairly certain that the only way to do a large scale development would be either through the subdivision act or the condominium.
I can just put in there. Kenny, if you don't mind, I could put single family residential subdivisions, comma, site condominiums, comma, and other land development options.
That does it. Thank you. That's all I have.
All right, let's go to exterior lighting, 6.6. This is something that the existing code doesn't have, and we thought this would be an advantage. Do we still like this as a rule?
Yes, yes.
A lot of the exterior lighting requirements are focused on trying to create dark sky compliance certification. That's where a lot of this is focused on.
Hi, Karen Ockfield, Birchwood. I don't have my book with me. But there's a man by the name of Talamy. And he says that conservation starts in our backyard. And he talks a lot about bugs and the idea of how they improve our world. And that 24 or all night long lighting around homes is really detrimental to their well-being. So I tried to get Mr. Talamy to come and do a talk here in Harbor Springs, and said, you know, maybe Harbor Springs could become a Talamy town. And the girl wrote back and said, what's that? So I would like to consider that. I don't have any of the language with me tonight, but it is, there's a home in Birchwood when you first drive in where the owner has placed lighting all around his house, and it just, you know, it glows. And when you're out in the middle of the lake now coming into Harbor Springs, all the many of the homes on the bluff are lit all the way around quite late at night. So if there is any way that we could help protect the bugs, that would be great.
Okay. Well, it seems to me that this section is an improvement over the current code, then takes us in the right direction for new development.
Yeah, I could just comment on that. I thought that this section was written quite well. It covered a lot of ground. And for the comment that was just made, there is a section 6.6.1 D, which talks about the use of motion timers, and things like that. So again, it addresses a lot of the concerns that we heard in the town hall.
And let's move on to exemptions. People think this makes sense?
Yes.
All right. Your stone lighting, Tony, what do you got there?
My last comment of the packet. I'm in section 665 D, line 591 B. I was a little confused here. LED lighting used to accent lighting on facades. But I guess I've got two questions here. Is the two supposed to be as LED lighting used as accent lighting on facades? And then secondly, that's a prohibition. I'm wondering why we don't want LED lighting on facades unless it's.
Well, because there's a in some business districts, when you don't control it, some commercial properties are starting to put LED lights up along the roof lines. And they keep them on all night. And I think that is kind of contradictory to what dark sky lighting is. So that's why it's, you prohibit that, so they can't do it.
So, the fourth word in there, I think.
It could be as.
Got it. Thank you. I'm done.
Anything else on lighting before we go to stormwater management? All right. Dan, what's this all about?
Well, we currently don't manage in a detailed way currently stormwater management in the current codes. This is the requirements that we would use when we evaluate site plan and stormwater management.
Okay.
I think I think I've changed it in one of the, I think I've changed it in a previous more recent edition we have on here, which I think is probably one of the best, easiest guidebooks to follow. We do reference the MEDC RRC infrastructure guidebook, which is a real good compendium for green infrastructure. I think I've substituted that for EPA, but now I'm concerned we may not have an EPA anymore. So you guys tell me what you want to use.
My first thought would be whatever you think is best, most descriptive and protects our community.
Well, I think I put the URL in here, it's, like I said, it's probably one of the easiest guidebooks for a property owner to understand what green infrastructure is and what some of the benefits are.
But it's got some bad initials.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Do we, okay, why don't we have the community do some research on it, right? Before the next meeting, let's see if there's anything evil or destructive in that wording. If not, then I would follow John's.
I've researched it. Michael asked me to take a look at it, and I think I have found another source, but when I looked at like MDEQ or Eagle stormwater requirements, they're very, very specific for engineers. And sometimes they're hard for lay people to understand. EPA has some pretty good ones under their smart growth. Even SEMCOG, Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, did one. But we can take a look. Maybe Vanessa, if you got.
I love SEMCOGs.
Yeah. So we could reference.
Yeah, and I did take a look at that, and it's great, my only concern is that I know what will happen, that something in this zoning code is linked to RRC best practice. And it's just gonna garner a lot of attention that, quite frankly, it doesn't deserve, because I think if people actually copied and pasted that URL and went to that, it's like a slide, almost like a slideshow. Is it not, John? That's what
It is.
And there's a lot of different options there. Excuse me.
If I give.
I'm looking at it. I'm looking at it as a council member and wearing a political hat, unfortunately. But.
So let's pick an inferior reference that has a better name. And
that seems kind of silly,
I can get some references put together.
Thank you.
As an alternative?
Yes.
It would not have those initials.
Right.
Okay.
I don't teach with those initials.
It doesn't have to be inferior. So.
Right, no.
And this is, I urge people to look at, to actually go to that.
But
I
I think rain gardens are a real thing. I would actually like rain gardens spelled out.
Where?
You pick the spot where you talk about, I don't know, where design of storm sewers, detention facilities and other, I somewhere, or maybe when you talk about, the use of swales, or I just think that, Ray, it would be good to actually.
Yeah, I'll insert it somewhere.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, number three, it does look like it could be a good
Yeah.
spot for it.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. How about rooftop decks, last section in this article? Yeah, what do we need to know about this?
Well, you have them, so we thought we'd put in a provision for it.
So we don't have anything in the existing code regarding this.
What's that?
We don't have anything in the existing code about rooftop decks?
No, we do.
We do.
Yeah.
The only thing that I would comment on is this says specifically rooftop commercial decks. We do have rooftop decks in residential neighborhoods as well. And I don't know if we wanna include something in here about those, or if that's just handled in the site plan review for. And that, okay, I just didn't know if that was needed here or not.
Yeah, I would recommend that if a house is gonna put a rooftop deck that it doesn't go through site plan review, it's too costly, it would just get reviewed by the zoning and by the building department. That would be my recommendation.
So it would not need to go in this.
It would not be. This is only for commercial usage.
So, John, I'm wondering, why are we specifically calling out amplified musical instruments as prohibited? I mean, it strikes me that you can have an amplified instrument that is well under 70 decibels in terms of its volume. Wouldn't it be sufficient to simply say amplified music or musical instruments that exceed 70 decibels? This is.
Oh, I see what you're.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could just have,
Yeah.
amplified music.
As a trombone player,
Yeah.
I support that.
Yeah. Trombone.
Yeah, I was a trombone player too, yeah.
Any woodwinds want to weigh in?
We have a variety of expertise in the panel here.
Wouldn't this be a city code? Why is it in the planning?
Good question.
Where is it now? What, is it in zoning now or in the city?
I believe that we have language regarding amplified music in both the city code and the zoning code. We certainly have a language regarding noise and amplified music in our nuisance section of the city code. But I believe that when we get into specific uses and districts, we may respell some standards and requirements or prohibitions regarding amplified music in the zoning code.
Correct me if I'm wrong, if it's in the city code, the police deal with enforcing it. And if it's in the zoning code, it's much more complicated, the letter and all, right?
I think the reverse, I think it's easier if it's in the zoning code, then it's a municipal infraction, and Jeff can handle that. If it's in the police code ordinance, it requires filing a citation to go to court.
But if somebody's making a lot of noise, don't we want to deal with it at the moment?
What
rather-
you do with, in that case, because it's a nuisance in the city code.
In the city code,
Public
nu-
safety would do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there could be a special use that permitted noise above 70 decibels.
This is for rooftop decks. So we don't want people in downtown having a rooftop deck that has a lounge at the top of it, playing a lot of music at night that is more than this required.
But if it went to a site plan review. And could it be approved?
It could be a condition.
That they would be allowed to exceed.
No, it'd be a condition of the site plan that they have to meet this requirement.
The planning commission can't approve a special land use that doesn't meet the requirements
Of the city code.
of the zoning code.
I just briefly go back to the previous comment. So reference 641 right at the top of this section, rooftop deck, commercial use. For this document will to kind of live on its own, should we also have a for residential, commercial rooftop or residential rooftop decks, please see this or reference to some other, go see this document or whatever. We're supposed to be addressing residential as well, but in this case, a residential rooftop deck would be dealt with separately from this code. So I just wanted to make a reference to that.
Oh, I see. So if someone's reading it, we can say, go visit the,
Go there.
go there. Okay, I got you.
So, yeah, we just put something maybe at the very bottom of
Bottom
that or
of-
wherever
yeah.
you want,
It can be very general, but you know,
even then with a link to the appropriate.
Yeah, got that.
Okay, any other input on this Article 6? Okay, good. We got through our agenda. Yes, Karen.
Mike? Hi, Karen. Ridgewood, so I guess I still don't understand. So these are the rooftop decks on top of the CBD district. But this is if there's a business on the second floor and then their roof is part of their business. And so this wouldn't be a rooftop deck above a residential. Is that right?
I think it's regardless of what is the use underneath it. It would be the use of the rooftop deck. If the people using the rooftop deck, it's being used by that residence, then it's a residential use for the rooftop deck. If the use of that rooftop deck is by a commercial business that's separated by whatever, then it would fall under that regulation. But I think furthermore, if we're looking at something where it's in a commercial district with commercial on the first floor, residential on the second, and then a rooftop deck on top of that, it's going to be here anyway, because they're looking at that comprehensive site plan for the whole building, not just the first floor commercial.
Okay. And so whatever they put up on top of it, that's going to have to do with the height of the CBD district and the buildings and things like that. So we'll get into that later.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. That brings us to our next meeting, 2 weeks from tonight, March 20th. And so what we will definitely do the red lines of this article, and we can come back to parking and share what we've learned and thought as we've slept on it. And we're also going to have a learning segment on density, and then get into Articles 7 and 9. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Is that, and I think on the agenda is probably like older new business. And I remember have anything they'd like to add. Okay. All right, feel good about our work tonight?
Very good.
Good. All right. Well, thanks everybody, especially our audience, for hanging with us.
Kenny,
There it is.
you get a kick out of it. That's my favorite.